at number 10, Flash of Two Worlds. By normal day standards, Flash of Two Worlds is by no means crazy, but back at the time when it first came out, it blew readers' minds. It is, after all, the start of the DC multiverse, and arguably the concept of multiverses in mainstream comics in general. It's considered to be a landmark comic book in which we first see Earth 2, and the concept of the multiverse is introduced. As the story goes, Carmine Infantino drew the cover of the famous issue, and Julius Schwartz, the editor at the time, came up with the concept of introducing Earth 2 as home of all of DC's Golden Age heroes. Infantino was trying to screw with him, and Schwartz was like, nah man, let's do this. So the story sees the Silver Age Flash, Barry Allen, teaming up with the Golden Age Flash, Jake Garrick. It would spawn annual crossovers between the two worlds in Justice League of America's comics, which eventually led up to the major event Crisis on Infinite Earths. And at number 9, the Amalgam Universe. Those of you familiar with our channel and any of our alternate lists will recognize this crossover. In 1996, DC vs. Marvel was released, a crossover between the two industry giants that featured various characters from each universe duking it out with one another. Aquaman fought Namor. The Flash fought Quicksilver. We saw Superman vs. the Hulk, and Batman vs. Captain America, and Wonder Woman vs. Storm. You guys get the idea. The whole crossover led to a 12-issue crossover universe, referred to as the Amalgam Universe, which is short for amalgamation, in which we got to see Marvel and DC characters amalgamated together, like Darkclaw, who was the combination of Batman and Wolverine. Eventually, in the series, the universes are returned to normal by the end of issue 12. Moving on to number 8, Wonder Woman and the Bionic Woman. This one definitely falls into the absurd category. So back in the late 70s, there used to be a television show called The Bionic Woman, which was a spin-off of another series from that era called The $6 Million Man, all about a dude who had been turned into a cyborg thanks to an experimental surgery. The Bionic Woman had a revival series back in 2007, but it did not do so well, which makes this crossover event even more curious. In 2012, a comic book series came out from Dynamite Entertainment in which the Bionic Woman teamed up with Linda Carter's Wonder Woman of the 70s TV series. It was called Wonder Woman 77 Meets the Bionic Woman. For those of you who grew up watching those two shows, there's definitely novelty there, but the strangest thing of all is the fact that this came out decades and decades and decades after both these characters had fallen out of the public eye significantly. We're talking about the 70s TV series Wonder Woman, not modern day Wonder Woman of the comics or the DCEU. Moving on to number 7, the death of Superman. Despite being my own personal most disliked story event ever, the death of Superman contains a whole lot of crazy crap in it, aside from Superman dying, being resurrected, and of course DC ruining death in comics forever. From 1992, this crossover event saw the Man of Steel going head-to-head with Doomsday and Metropolis. The two punch each other to death, quite literally, and everyone thinks Superman is dead. We got to see a whole lot of issues from other comics in the DC universe featuring the reactions of other characters to Superman's death. In the aftermath, a bunch of false Superman imposters come out of the woodwork, some of which stir up a whole lot of trouble, including destroying Coast City, the home of Green Lantern Hal Jordan. That then spawns a whole nightmare of a plot in which Hal Jordan uses his power ring to try to reconstruct and resurrect the city, only for the Green Lantern Corps to call him out on misusing it, which leads to him going on a rampage and murdering them all. That was eventually retconned somewhat to reveal that Hal Jordan was just, possessed by Parallax. Meanwhile, turns out Superman wasn't actually dead after all, and that he was just in a Kryptonian coma, which just made it look like he was dead, because apparently a Kryptonian coma looks just like regular human death. The whole thing was very stupid and kind of all over the place. Moving on to number 6, Batman Nightfall. In 1993, one of Batman's most iconic moments occurred in a crossover story called Nightfall. In it, Batman is struggling with burning out and ends up losing badly to Bane, who manages to break the hero's back. Batman has to sit out for a while, and because of this, an apprentice named John Paul Valley ends up taking the mantle for him, but becomes really troublesome, abusing his power and becoming increasingly violent. It gets to the point where Jean Paul is clearly unstable and has trashed Batman's reputation. Eventually, Batman is healed thanks to some paranormal fun times, but in the aftermath of Nightfall, Bruce briefly passes the cowl down to Dick Grayson. It's a whole thing, but the most iconic thing is that image of Bane breaking Batman's back. It's a biggie. And at number 5, Harley and Ivy meet Betty and Veronica. Sounds like a wacky concept, doesn't it? In this crossover, we see Harley Quinn and Poison Ivy swapping bodies with Archie Comics' Betty and Veronica. The whole story is filled with shenanigans as the four characters pretend to carry on as if everything is normal, all while trying to figure out how to reverse the body swap. This goes down after Harley and Ivy try to stop Veronica Lodge's father from destroying a swamp located in Riverdale. There's a lot of other weird stuff that goes down in it too, like Catwoman low-key being a mega fan of Josie and the Pussycats, Reggie Mantle believing that he is in fact the Joker after suffering a head injury, and even some magic meddling from Sabrina the Teenage Witch. And at number 4, Blackest Night. Blackest Night occurred between 2009 and 2010, written by Jeff Johns and penciled by Ivan Reis. The story consists of a character named Necron, who is death personified, going around and reanimating dead superheroes as a means of eliminating all life and emotion in the universe. The whole theme behind it was emotion, but what it's most remembered for is its zombified versions of various heroes, and how utterly terrifying they looked. Hal Jordan and the rest of the Green Lanterns end up battling the Black Lantern Corps, who are made up of all of those that Necron has resurrected. There's also a part in it in which Black Hand digs up Bruce Wayne's skeleton as part of a ritual, and then licks his skull. It is a fun time. Up next, number 3, Milk Wars. Milk Wars is a strange one, but it's also really cool. It's a crossover between DC's Prime Timeline and their Young Animal imprint, and came out in 2018. According to the creative team behind it, which included My Chemical Romance frontman and Umbrella Academy creator Gerard Way, the inspiration for the series was how milk's wholesomeness could sometimes be a bad thing. Take from that what you will. In this series, we see an omnipotent corporation called Retcon, which is quite funny, stealing stories and reconfiguring them for new markets, who twist some of the most iconic DC characters into different versions of themselves. This includes Superman as a murderous milkman, Batman as a vigilante priest, and Wonder Woman as Wonder Wife. It's revealed that Retcon's plans is to take all the DC Universe heroes and make them into puppets, but when they don't manage to secure a sale to a buyer, Retcon attempts to refresh the DC Universe entirely, wiping out the continuity. Talk about meta. And at number 2, Dark Knight's Metal. Another recent crossover event, Dark Knight's Metal, which is spearheaded by creative dream team Scott Snyder and Greg Capullo, introduced a crazy concept to the DC multiverse. We're talking the Dark Multiverse, a place that was home to a bunch of negative Earths in which terrible things had happened, including the creation of a slew of corrupt Batman alternates. Batman stumbles upon it when he's tinkering with some strange metals that he's found from his journeys over the years. From the Red Death, an amalgamated version of the Flash and Bruce Wayne, to the Drowned, a female version of Bruce Wayne who had bioengineered herself to have Aquaman's abilities and rule Atlantis, there were a lot of scary possibilities that the Dark Multiverse showed us. The whole storyline was that a demonic entity named Barbados wanted to consume the regular multiverse and destroy it, and its mission was led by a Batman alternate that's arguably one of the scariest DC creations to date, the Batman Who Laughs. The result of Batman killing the Joker and inhaling the toxin released from the Joker's body. That Batman goes insane, inheriting all of the Joker's craziness and desire for chaos, and ends up going on a massive killing spree. He ends up killing all of his allies in the Bat family, he turns his Robins into rabid dogs on leashes, and murders the Justice League before he heads on over to Batman and the Justice League from the Prime Timeline. His character was so popular that he's even returned in his own solo series, tormenting the Dark Knight some more. And finally, in at number 1, Doomsday Clock. Another recent crossover event, one that is actually still ongoing at the time of this recording. Doomsday Clock is a DC crossover in which the characters from the Watchmen universe have been integrated into the Prime continuity. It's revealed that the creation of the New 52 reboot, or reset of the universe rather, was all thanks to Dr. Manhattan's involvement after Flashpoint. The crossover is meant to be a sequel to the original Watchmen by Alan Moore and Dave Gibbons, with the whole story beginning with Batman discovering the smiley face button in his Batcave. A lot of stuff happens. The comedian has been brought back to life, there's a new Rorschach working with Night Owl, and it's all leading up to an assumed confrontation between Dr. Manhattan and Superman. Despite how absurd this all sounds, especially to Watchmen fans, the series so far has been getting decent reviews. So hey, maybe it will surprise us.
In at number 10, Iron Lantern. This comic book crossover is more of a combination of characters than separate appearances, but it's still damn cool. Gifting us with the combo of both Tony Stark and Hal Jordan, we get the ultimate character of Iron Lantern. The combo does make for some strange reading, but somehow manages to pull it off quite nicely. And once you can come around to this charming new character and continue reading, you'll be delighted to find it chock full of awesomeness, including Iron Lantern launching a giant shark into space. In at number 9, Bullets and Bracelets. Yes, that is the real name of the comic book. How incredible is that? It gets better. This comic book series features a unique crossover of Wonder Woman and the Punisher, and she's even rocking a pretty cool looking jacket with the Punisher's logo on it. Now, the pair in this comic book are actually married, which gives us a whole new different type of crossover than what we're used to usually with the Punisher. Usually he's hell-bent on killing and the other characters have a moral dilemma with that. However, in this crossover event, the couple is hunting down their kidnapped child, which just adds so much more to the dynamic. It's no longer random. It's a driven plot with purpose. In at number 8, Bat meets Cap. Both of these characters are the leaders in their own franchises and have a ton in common with regards to dealing with bad guys. This comic book is exactly what you would expect as well. My favorite part was after seeing Captain America take down a giant Nazi war machine, and while he's attempting to save citizens from a hijacked plane, he's shot out of the air, which is when Batman swoops in to save him, which then cuts to a great team up with the pair kicking ass and taking names, all with giant smiles on their face too. In at number 7, the first crossover. Back in 1976, we had the very first crossover between DC and Marvel, one that pit Superman against the Amazing Spider-Man. Now you know it's going to be a historic crossover event when on the very first page we get comments from both Stan Lee and Carmine Infantino. This series is set up perfectly first by giving Superman tons of time to establish his character and then introducing Spidey later on in the mix. We also get to see both Lex Luthor and Dr. Octopus together for the very first time, and eventually help each other break out of their prison cells. Number 6, The Hunger. Now I love the integration of bad guys from both series in the last one I mentioned. That's why Darkseid vs Galactus is such a cool crossover idea. Except this time, they don't have the same intentions at heart. And in Darkseid vs Galactus The Hunger, these two mega villains are duking it out, which makes you oddly want to pick sides, even though they're both evil. Perhaps the most unique part about this crossover is that both villains are evenly matched, and it shows when they finally get to battle it out. Although the superhero crossovers in this comic book are great, I was hoping for much more from this meeting of the malevolent. I definitely didn't expect them to just fire some lasers at each other. Kinda lame. Number 5, Uncanny. This crazy DC crossover comes to us in Uncanny X-Men / New Teen Titans. This team up is very fun and well written, but if you're going to sit down to read it, you should cancel all other appointments. It is a huge and very dense comic book chock full of plots just to follow. We get 2 different plots for X-Men and Teen Titans, a side story with Robin, and several different romances including Colossus and Starfire making out, which is followed by a hilarious line from Robin where he says, "Sorry about this, Starfire absorbs languages through physical contact. Sometimes she gets carried away." Romance aside, this comic book also features Wolverine, Deathstroke, the Phoenix, and Gorilla Grodd, which just feels right. In at number 4, The Fantastic Superman. Fantastic indeed. This DC crossover is a fan favorite because it brings together Superman and the Fantastic Four. And we got some awesome moments of Superman going toe to toe with Galactus and the Fantastic Four. We also get a narrative that suggests Superman, who is seen as a cartoon, is actually a real life hero. To that note, we have a funny moment with Franklin Storm just being a little fanboy, and a clinically unimpressed Reed Richards who's quite used to primetime cartoons showing up in the flesh for some reason. Number 3, Battle Royale. Had to give this crazy DC crossover that name considering all the madness that ensues with the Avengers going face to face with the Justice League of America. This has to be a comic book writer's dream to include so many superheroes jam-packed into one comic, and they do not disappoint. Not only do we get epic team-up moments against bad guys, but we also get to see almost every hero using their respective powers to fight one another. Number 2, Just Imagine. This series is crazy special because it takes classic DC characters and through the eyes of Stan Lee reimagines them from his point of view. It's not a simple reboot either. You can tell that a lot of time went into perfectly crafting and creating the heroes we know and love from DC. Not only does the late great Stan Lee reinvent these heroes, he attaches a new and inventive backstory for each of them. In this series we get to see a new Superman, Batman, Green Lantern, and a plethora of other great characters. Lastly, at our number 1 spot, All Access. This 4-part series is an incredibly well thought out plot that features a unique crossover of DC and Marvel. And All Access offers great spacing for the storyline where we see the main characters getting their solo moments along with an overarching storyline. You can tell a ton of work went into creating a crossover that wasn't too dense and carefully spread out amongst the 2 universes. If that wasn't enough for you, DC and Marvel also teamed up to create a superhero known as Access, which just seems fitting.
Number 10, Doctor Strange. Why is this mashup so appealing? The same reason I enjoy watching Batman and Zatanna together. The idea of Batman needing assistance with something of a more supernatural nature, and the idea of a mortal human detective based in cold hard reality mashing up in a scenario that requires his skill but is just enough mysticism sprinkled in to warrant Doctor Strange's involvement. I would love it if these two went on some kind of spiritual ghost hunt together, a la the early early Doctor Strange days. Or maybe the two could meet at some kind of meditation retreat and both get called into action and have to team up. Another idea for the two would be to have Doctor Strange of Earth 616 team up with the vampiric Batman of Earth 43. Vampiric? Vampiric? I guess it doesn't really matter which way you say that word. Potato potato. It wouldn't be the first time Doctor Strange has worked with or against the undead who call themselves vampire. During the Montesi Formula story arc, he teamed up with vampire detective Hannibal King and Blade, working to defeat Dracula himself. Another idea is the arcane arts come to Gotham in the form of a villain who is experimenting with magics. Maybe Black Mask, which could be spooky, or maybe Calendar Man is no longer posing as a stage magician as he did during his debut in Detective Comics issue 259, but has become a real one. That could be a fun kind of adventure. And Doctor Strange answers the call to help as Zatanna is unavailable. You know, sometimes she's busy, she can't help Batman all the time. She got things. Number 9. Iron Man. Both are billionaire playboys, or at least appear to be. Still, while Batman might not agree with Tony's lifestyle choices, both characters are known for their brilliance and for their obsession with control and ability to plan ahead, and this might be enough to make them a strong team up. Tony, after all, was the instigator behind Civil War I with his Superhero Registration Act. He has since learned the error of his ways, but still tends to be quite lawful when it comes to his views. He would be lawful good for sure if he were a D&D character. Meanwhile, Batman suffers from borderline OCD and paranoia when it comes to being prepared, and as such created contingency plans for all of his fellow JLA members, only to have them fall into the hands of Ra's al Ghul and be used against his teammates, forcing him to apologize to the team. Neither is a known killer, and both heroes prefer to trust in the system when it comes to vengeance and justice. Plus, we all know we would want to see Batman get his own Iron Man suit, complete with the little metal bat ears. That'd be great. I'm Iron Man now. Woo! Iron Bat. Oh. Iron Bat would be awesome. Make it happen. Number 8. Spider-Man. I mean, you knew he was going to be on here because who wouldn't want to see just about anyone team up with Spider-Man, right? The crazy thing is this dream team has already happened. The pair had a one-shot team up in 1995 with the comic Spider-Man and Batman Disordered Minds. But it's been over 20 years since the two have shared the pages of a comic book, and I think it's about time we make this happen again. Besides, we have to have Black Cat and Catwoman join in for this team up. As cool as Carnage and the Joker were together, I'm personally more interested in seeing a caper story where Catwoman and Black Cat team up for some good old-fashioned thieving, and Spider-Man and Batman have to put a stop to their dangerous femme fatales. Oh my gosh, I was almost like, lady swap anyone? Then I was like, wait. Number 7. Black Panther. These two together would truly be some of the most teched out. I know what you're thinking, but what about the Bats and Iron Man team up I suggested earlier? Yes, those two would also have a ton of tech, but Black Panther comes from Wakanda, and as great as Tony's tech might be, not even Stark can beat the tech coming out of Panther's homeland. Black Panther and Bats also have a similar look and sometimes a similar fighting style, though I would say that Batman is kind of the sneakier of the two. Let's have them team up. Number 6. Iron Fist. These two are both skilled martial artists who I would love to both see duke it out and then combine their skills to take down a big bad. I think Iron Fist could even give Batman more of a run for his money than any other hero from Marvel who he's taken in hand-to-hand combat. I'm imagining Bruce joining with Danny in an attempt to take down the League of Assassins, or the Hand. Seeing them have to take on someone like Lady Shiva or maybe someone like Taskmaster could also be super interesting. Who do you think that pair should take on? Give me your best martial artists, villains. Number 5. Jessica Jones. I think Batman would feel a lot of respect for Jessica Jones. The two could team up on a case together, maybe they were both tracking the same perp for different reasons, they run into each other, or maybe Bruce decides he wants a fresh start and decides to live under an alias as a private PI of his own, and the two end up as like rival detectives competing for cases. But these two are bound to do well together whatever happens, and it never hurts to have Batman team up with someone who has real superpowers, in case they run into a threat too large for Batman's planning, or vice versa, a problem that just can't be crushed by Jessica's super strength, and maybe it needs Batman's help in terms of locating that perfect weak spot. They'd complement each other so well. Number 4. Daredevil. Two costumes that are designed to scare, with one that might possibly be more terrifying than the other. I'll let you battle out in the comments as to who you think I'm talking about there. Who is the scarier costume? What do you think? Both are masterful investigators who pose as wealthy citizens during the day, and are sometimes known for their playboy tendencies. These two are both brutal assailants with a belief in justice and a policy for not killing their enemies, just beating them senseless. Two that we would love to see on a murder case. In fact, we already have. These two have teamed up once in 1997 in Daredevil / Batman Eye for an Eye, and again in 2000 in the sequel King of New York. You know, a team up is good when it happens again that soon after. And seeing as how it's been almost 20 years, I figured we're due for another team up of these two different yet similar heroes. P.S. their team ups are pretty good, so just saying, maybe we get some more now? DC and Marvel, do more crossover things, please. We want it. Number 3. Captain America. Considering the Batman is best friends with Superman, is anyone surprised that many would love to see Batman and Captain America team up? In fact, it shouldn't be surprising because these two did team up in 1996, accompanied by their own sidekicks. This comic was kind of actually more of a sidekick swap than anything, though, where Batman ended up with Bucky and Cap ended up working with Robin to take down the Red Skull and Joker. Or in the end, really just Red Skull, as the Joker himself defected from the plot after finding out that he was working for a Nazi. Apparently even for Joker that's too much. I will kill a bunch of babies, but Nazis, that's where I draw the line. The two also crossed paths in an Avengers and Justice League crossover where Batman actually decided to call a truce while fighting Cap, realizing that in Steve Rogers he had found a fairly even match to his abilities, and that the fight was kind of pointless. They were just both gonna probably fight each other forever if they didn't stop it, so I'd love to see the two of these strong, evenly matched superheroes come together to protect not just the Earth, but the universe. I'd like to see Darkseid and Thanos end up somehow working together and then Cap and Batman have to like lead a team and take them on. It'd be pretty crazy. I know it was pretty crazy in like JLA / Avengers, but I think we could go even crazier with it. Cap and Bats make too good of a team, and it's been too long since we've seen this pair together, so come on, give me something new. Give me something even bigger than that crossover. Or like just Batman and Cap versus the universe. Number 2. Nick Fury. Both are known for always being super prepared, and both are super sleuths who pride themselves on knowing what's going on at all times, even when we think there is no way that they could have known. Remember that whole ordeal with Jezebel Jet and Batman? She revealed it was all a ruse, and then he revealed he knew it was a ruse, and he was also performing a ruse on her. And we were like, wait, what? If you knew, then why did you sleep with her? What's happening? Anyways, Nick Fury and Batman would also likely complement one another in terms of their way that they approach going about doing their business and getting the job done. Both are focused and serious. It could be cool to see Batman be recruited by S.H.I.E.L.D. in order to help with a special ops mission, and then go in with Nick Fury. Or maybe the two would both be leaders of like their own team out on the same mission and just run into each other, see the value of each other, and then team up. That could be cool. Secret Agent Batman. Batman James Bond mashup. That would also be cool. Number 1. Deadpool. In the Spider-Man / Deadpool team-up comic issue number 6, we see Deadpool and Spidey talking about superhero movies. The two end up attending a spoof version of Batman v Superman when they watch Nighthawk v Hyperion. They take turns after the viewing pointing out everything wrong with the film, the lack of motivation and the obsession with like thinking 5 films ahead instead of simply working at all towards making the film itself a standalone success. I would love a team up that casts Batman and Deadpool in like a similar vibe and just turns this joke back on Deadpool himself. DC might not be down as it also kind of makes fun of the Batman v Supes film itself, but the punchline would actually be that Deadpool is the king of nonsensical fights in the comic book world. He frequently ends up tussling with Wolverine for no other reason than he can. He fights a lot of people in comics sometimes for just no reason, so. But whatever story DC and Marvel choose to explore with these two heroes, just the two characters sharing a page would likely be a treat. Just a panel even. Give me a panel. Batman could play the perfect straight man to Wade's crazy, and I'm sure both would drive one another up the wall. And keep in mind, Deadpool isn't easy to frustrate in a team up. He's usually got too much pep in his step. But if anyone can annoy Wade, I'll bet it's Batman. He'd be way too serious.
I can't remember when I saw Scooby-Doo meets Batman for the first time, but I know it shaped me as a person. Technically, it first came out in 1972, but was released on home video in 2004. The DVD had 2 episodes on it, The Dynamic Scooby-Doo Affair and The Caped Crusader Caper. At first glance, what does a gaggle of teenagers and a talking dog have to do with a billionaire superhero and his ward? The longer I think about it though, I get it. Both teams love a good mystery. They are routinely up against weird people in funny little outfits. They both have iconic cars. Plus, when you take in Batman's penchant for adopting odd teenagers, the dots are connecting. The 2 crossover episodes inspired a later addition to the Scooby-Doo Batman universe, the feature-length film Scooby-Doo and Batman, the Brave and the Bold. Both episodes and the movie feature the Joker. The episode's secondary villain is the Penguin, and for the movie, it's a new guy named Red Cloak. This isn't the last time that Batman and Scooby-Doo cross paths. In 2019, 2013, Scooby-Doo Guess Who aired. It was a show that was created pretty much for guest stars. Lots of big names were featured, including another run-in with the Caped Crusader. This time, Batman is looking for Alfred, who, get this, is an honorary uncle to Daphne. So now we know that Daphne and Alfred are close family friends. Picture this, you are in New York, you're having a great time by the river, and then massive titans come out of the water and try to make you lunch. That's exactly the day New Yorkers had in Attack on Avengers, the 2014 Avengers and Attack on Titan crossover. The story was first released in Japan and then released in the US the next year. I'm guessing that most of the people watching this video know the Avengers, but for the 0.1% that don't, they are a Marvel superhero team. For those unsure about Attack on Titan, it's a Japanese anime series that takes place in a post-apocalyptic world terrorized by titans. Titans enjoy humans for lunch and are basically giants that are really hard to kill. Luckily, the Avengers have dealt with tough guys before and put up a solid fight when the Titans show up in NYC. Right at the end, we even get a visit from the Colossal Titan, the biggest and baddest of them all, and hopefully he gets taken down when the Guardians of the Galaxy also show up. We don't know exactly how it ends, as the comic's last panel is just Iron Man telling the Avengers the battle isn't over. So it's a cliffhanger with no concrete resolution as of right now, but maybe soon. There was this weird time when the X-Men were fighting Mojo in the X-Men Volume 2 issue 10 and ended up in the Mojoverse. The Mojoverse is inhabited by beings that are addicted to TV, so the way to rule the population is to make the best TV, putting in people's favorite actors, remaking films, and Mojo's choice is Wizard of Oz starring the X-Men because the X-Men bring in great ratings, true there and here. Mojo calls it his Wizard of X, and the cast list is as follows: Longshot as Dorothy, Wolverine as the Cowardly Lion, Rogue as the Tin Man, Cyclops as the Scarecrow, and Beast as Toto. The gang follows the Yellow Brick Road all the way to defeating Mojo. It wasn't easy, but they did it. While this choice may have been unexpected, it wasn't totally out of left field. Marvel has actually done The Wizard of Oz before in 1975. That collaboration was equally unexpected because it wasn't just Marvel and The Wizard of Oz, DC was there too. The Wizard of Oz comic was the first time DC and Marvel published something together. Joint publishing wasn't the original plan, it just so happened that both companies were developing a Wizard of Oz comic at the same time, and having two Oz comics out there would not have worked out well for either of them. So Stan Lee called DC up and suggested the joint venture. It was accepted and made comic book history. After the success of Christmas specials from other popular studios, Disney wanted something similar. In 2009, they aired Prep and Landing on ABC. The story centers around the elves that get people's houses ready for Santa's arrival. Proper tree trimming, nut-free cookies, things like that. The special did really well. It won awards and everything, so it's no surprise that Marvel wanted in on the Christmas action. In 2011, Prep and Landing Mansion Impossible was released as the backup comic in a few Marvel issues. It followed the same two elves from the animated special as they decked the halls of the Avengers Mansion. The charm and humor of the comic rests in the fact that the elves have no idea who is in the mansion. I guess the Avengers' worldwide fame has yet to make it to the North Pole. They think the Hulk is a Christmas fanatic because he's green, and the Avengers A stands for awesome. It's a super cute comic to get you into the holiday spirit, so bookmark it for December. Marvel's main universe is sometimes called the Prime Universe, especially fitting when Optimus Prime is involved. That's right, the Avengers and the Transformers have teamed up. Technically, it didn't happen in the Prime Universe, I just thought that would be a cute intro. Marvel was producing Transformer comics as early as 1984 in a successful 80-issue run, even though the characters were originally property of Hasbro. They had the characters licensed, but then lost them a few years later, but as luck would have it, in 2007 they were back in business with the new Avengers/Transformers. The basic plot is that tensions are high between Latveria, ruled by Dr. Doom, and neighbor Symkaria. The Avengers and Transformers are trying to prevent a war. They are teammates by the end, but it was a rocky start. When the Avengers first saw the Transformers, attack mode was initiated. I think that's fair. Imagine one day a gaggle of massive robot cars shows up with blasters, I'd panic too. Everybody calms down eventually and works together to save the day. Bringing in the Transformers was a really good move because that meant Iron Man got Transformer-sized armor, and any win for Tony is a win for me. The Looney Tunes and DC universes are almost the same age, both founded in the 1930s. The Looney Tunes is a family-friendly film and TV animated franchise. It's super lighthearted and almost always leans into the slapstick form of comedy. Then on the other side is DC. DC started out a bit goofy and lighter in content, at least when you compare it to what it is today. Nowadays, when you see DC media, it typically has dark themes and screens and is generally pretty serious in nature. But when both franchises are owned by the same parent company, no crossover is off the table. Starting in 2017, an epic comic crossover between DC and Looney Tunes was in full swing. Crossover event was titled DC Meets Looney Tunes and featured 10 pairings, each getting their own issue. The issue would start with a comic done in the DC style, and then the second was drawn in the style of Looney Tunes. It was a fun series with fun character designs, if I do say so myself. There have been DC crossovers on TV too. In a 2003 episode of Duck Dodgers, Daffy Duck accidentally gets his dry cleaning mixed up with the Green Lanterns. Daffy turns into the Green Lantern for a bit, but eventually returns the suit. TMNT, the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, have had the pleasure of fighting alongside everyone's favorite Caped Crusader, Batman, multiple times. There was a 6-issue comic series, Batman/Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, released in 2015. Part 2 was released in 2017, Part 3 in 2019. In 2016, a spin-offs miniseries called Batman/Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Adventures was released, and then an animated film in 2019 called Batman vs. Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. So they are basically best friends at this point. Part 1 and 2 of the comics and the Adventures miniseries are the TMNT being transported into Batman's universe, whereas Part 3 is set in a different universe that the Turtles and Batman both just live in. The film is kind of a mashup of the comics. In the comics Part 1, the Turtles were desperate to get back to their universe because the thing that created them was considered an anomaly in Batman's world, and if they stayed too long, they would slowly die. That didn't fit in with the plans for the movie too well, so they used the universe from Part 3 as the base, and then some of the plot ideas from Part 1 for the story. The film got really good reviews. People seem to enjoy seeing this pairing, and studios are hopeful for sequels in the future, so I'm sure we'll see them together again soon. In the show Riverdale, I know we don't like to think about it as a society, but unfortunately right now we must. In the show, there is a plot line where all the characters get superpowers. I wish I was kidding, but I am not. It's always been the most random plot choice to me. Imagine my shock and surprise when I find out there may have actually been source material for it. While the Archie and the Punisher crossover has no correlation to the show, it hopefully inspired that plotline. Archie and the Punisher was a shocking collab because those characters have nothing in common. Archie is this wholesome high school kid, and the Punisher is not that. He is very rough around the edges and aggressive. The idea of pairing these two up actually started as a joke. That joke was mentioned to a higher up, and suddenly it wasn't a joke anymore. There aren't any universe transfers. Riverdale just exists in the Punisher's world. So the Punisher is tracking this bad guy named Red, who looks a lot like Archie. Of course, Archie is mistaken for Red, but once the Punisher realizes it's not him, they end up kind of working together to get Red captured. I don't know if the Riverdale CW writers planned or stumbled into this, but in the show, Archie's character does become his own kind of Punisher and starts a vigilante group called the Red Circle. Maybe the Riverdale writers were not just spinning a dartboard for plot points and were actually trying to subtly bring the comics to life. When Debbie Ryan said she sat down with the president of Disney Channel and told him she wanted to make history, she was talking about an on-screen wedding, but she should have been talking about the crossover she had with Spider-Man. The episodes aired at the same time, and no one knows why Disney chose this pairing, but Jessie is set in New York, so that might have been a factor. The episode is titled Halloween Night at the Museum, a nod to another famous, now Disney movie. For those who weren't watching the Disney Channel at the time of Jessie, the show was about an actress who moved to New York to pursue her dream, but she needed a survival job. That job was being a nanny to the 4 kids of famous actors. It was like she was a nanny to Brangelina, basically. This was a live-action show, so what are they doing on Ultimate Spider-Man? The plot is basically, it's Halloween. There is an exhibit in the museum on Camelot. A suit of armor contains the evil Morgan Le Fay. She is released, and then Spider-Man and the Jessie crew have to put her back before she plunges the world into total darkness. The Jessie crew isn't transported to the Ultimate Spider-Man universe, they just exist there, which implies that there is a universe where everybody in the Disney Channel universe and the Marvel universe exist together. Where is the sweet life of Wanda and Pietro? Make Miley Cyrus a Hannah Montana Dazzler. The sky's the limit. One time, my friends went thrifting and told me they got me a present, and it was Phineas and Ferb Mission Marvel on DVD, and I put it on display. It was the first Disney Channel Marvel crossover, and it was surprisingly perfect. The show was the perfect setting to poke fun at Marvel and having it make sense. Phineas and Ferb as characters just fit right in next to the heroes with their superior engineering skills. They reference iconic MCU lines. Stan Lee has a cameo. It's perfect! Okay, so the drama. Dr. Doofenshmirtz created the Power Draininator to suck the mayoral powers from his mayor brother, but it got the Avengers instead. Their powers end up in Phineas and Ferb's space station containment unit, but no one knows that till the end. So the whole thing is about trying to get the heroes' powers back while keeping the tri-state area safe from the villain squad. Candace and Isabella are the ones to go to the space station and get the powers back in the end. The lineup for the final battle is wild. MODOK, Whiplash, Venom, and Red Skull are up against Spider-Man, the Hulk, Iron Man, Thor, Perry the Platypus, Phineas and Ferb as Beak, Baljeet Hulk, Buford as Bear Boy, and Dr. Doofenshmirtz shooting waffles. I know that sounds ridiculous, but the battle is basically the endgame battle in a different font. The events of this show take place in the same universe as the ones from Jessie, at least that's what we can assume, as the voice actors for the heroes are the same ones from Ultimate Spider-Man.
Starting us off in at number 10, Civil War II. While the first Civil War may have been liked by some but disliked by others, most people can agree. Civil War II was not a solid follow-up to its predecessor. The crossover was initiated not to continue a Civil War storyline per se, but rather to act as a cross-promotion for the MCU's Captain America Civil War feature film, which was arguably significantly better than this comic book story arc. This time around, the beef is between Iron Man and a different captain, Captain Marvel. An Inhuman with precognitive powers is discovered. Carol Danvers thinks the heroes of Earth should use his powers to predict crimes and prevent them from happening. Tony Stark argues against that, believing that they shouldn't. It's a whole debate between free will and determinism, and it gets messy. A lot of people were bummed that Civil War II basically turned Carol Danvers' Captain Marvel into a fascist-like character, with her even having Miss Marvel Kamala Khan run around with a youth militia. Overall, it was a story arc that was executed poorly despite conceptually having some solid potential. Moving on to number 9, Original Sin. Original Sin is a crossover that has gotten mixed reviews. Some fans really loved it, while others were pretty disappointed. This is particularly because of how the crossover was marketed. Readers thought they were going to get an awesome cosmic murder mystery. The premise of this event is that Uatu the Watcher has been found murdered, and our favorite heroes end up investigating the crime, with Black Panther having his own lead over in Wakanda and the Punisher having a lead of his own, and the Avengers heading on over to the Watcher's base on the moon. It was also predictable. Many readers figured out the story's twist long before it even occurred, making for an anticlimactic conclusion. Some loved it for how weird the whole thing was, and that it did things like explore unlikely pairings like Doctor Strange and the Punisher working together. Throughout the story, some major secrets pertaining to Marvel heroes' lives were revealed, including Tony Stark being involved in Bruce Banner becoming the Hulk while he was drunk, and that Daredevil's mother suffered from paranoia from her postpartum depression and tried to abuse him as a baby, etc, etc. I mean, other secrets weren't as bad, like Lockjaw finding out the location of where he had a bone, so... Moving on to number 8, DC vs. Marvel. DC vs. Marvel is exactly what it sounds like. It's generally a crossover that many have nostalgic feelings for, being a popular one that came out in the 90s. But really, it is just a giant mashup of DC and Marvel characters duking it out, with battle pair-ups that some readers didn't really agree with. I'm sorry, but there is no way that Wolverine would have beaten Lobo. Anywho, the story threading it all together was lackluster, making the crossover feel more like a fantasy fan service attempt rather than something substantial. But one good thing did come out of it, and that is the Amalgam Universe, an alternate reality in which DC and Marvel characters were amalgamated together, like Wolverine and Batman becoming Darkclaw. Their origin stories would be a combination of both characters along with their storylines. Silver linings, people. Silver linings. Moving on to number 7, Age of Ultron. Age of Ultron is a 2013 crossover event, which is very different than the Avengers Age of Ultron MCU film. Do not mistake the two. Joss Whedon just borrowed the name of this comic story arc. It has nothing to do with each other. This story arc takes place across two Earths, 26111 and 61112. The former being an Earth where Morgan Le Fay took over half the world, and the latter being an Earth in which Ultron had annihilated all of humanity. The biggest criticism of this crossover was the fact that it felt more like it belonged as a what-if title rather than an event of its own. Many readers felt that the heroes featured on these alternate Earths, who were trying to survive in Ultron's harsh reality, made flat-out bad or uncharacteristic decisions. And the worst part? Ultron wasn't even really in this series all that much. For an event to be named after a specific character, you'd like to think that they would be one of the main individuals that we'd follow throughout the story. But nope. Not the case with this one. In at 6, Axis. The Axis crossover was essentially a massive inversion of all of Marvel's characters, which hit stands in 2014. Long story short, Red Onslaught, who is basically just a psychically OP Red Skull, ends up inverting all of the heroes and villains, making the heroes into baddies and the villains into good guys. While that's a pretty dope premise, it floundered a lot. All of the characters fell into some hardcore trope territory, feeling super two-dimensional rather than actually exploring a complex storyline, or character arcs for that matter. Doctor Doom in particular got a lot of outrage, becoming a hollowed version of a character that was ripe with potential under a concept like this. Up next at 5, Secret Empire. The famous Captain America is a secret Nazi story arc. Prior to Secret Empire, Marvel released a series called Captain America Steve Rogers, which revealed that the patriotic hero was actually a sleeper agent for Hydra all along. You can see why that pissed people off. Anywho, Secret Empire was the story of Hydra using this fascist Cap to attempt to take over the world, something that had been set up for a long time coming in the Marvel Universe, according to this narrative. It all crumbles though when it's revealed that Hydra Cap is actually an alternate reality Cap and the real 616 Cap was never a Nazi. It felt like a major cop-out just to get sales and media attention, especially being released in 2017, hot off of some major political drama over in the US concerning the rise of neo-Nazis after Trump's election. I mean, comics are historically inspired by socio-political context of the times, ever since newspaper comics were introduced in the late 1980s, so hey, it makes sense. But it still pissed off a lot of people. And at number 4, Heroes Reborn. Heroes Reborn is disliked for 2 major reasons. First off, it was a pretty bad attempt at relaunching some of the titles at Marvel that weren't doing so hot in the sales department, and some of the stories were just not well written whatsoever. The second reason, and perhaps the one that most felt really passionate about, is the fact that the artwork in it is complete garbage. You are probably familiar with the notorious image of Captain America, whose chest is basically a whole shelf. You could put a TV on that thing. It's ridiculous. The artwork was criticized for being incorrectly proportioned and just flat out ugly. But back to the plotline. It was frustrating at best. After everyone was killed off by Onslaught in the 616 universe, it was explained that everyone was then reborn by being transported to a pocket universe created by Franklin Richards, in which the characters' origins and histories were revised and updated for modern audiences. Sales were low, and a lot of the changes that were made were unfavorable amongst fans. And at number 3, Avengers The Crossing. The Crossing is the crossover that threatened to ruin Iron Man completely. It essentially takes his character, makes him into something that nobody recognizes and everyone hated, then basically undoes all of the damage by introducing a younger Tony Stark, killing off the bad Tony Stark, replacing him with the young Tony Stark, all to be retconned out of existence years later. It was dumb. So essentially Tony Stark goes on a rampage after he falls under the influence of Kang the Conqueror, which brings forth an even worse revelation, that Tony Stark has always been under the influence of Kang the Conqueror. Wait a second, where does that sound familiar? Secret Empire? Is that you? Anywho, the Avengers pull teenage Tony Stark out of another reality and use him to defeat Kang Stark. Also, Janet Van Dyne is turned into an actual wasp, and that was weird as f. Up next, number 2, Secret Wars 2. The Secret Wars crossover event was considered a huge success, and many readers feel it is one of Marvel's best crossovers to date, even if it was a crossover whose initial purpose was to solely sell toys to kids. Now, all of that success cannot be said of its follow-up crossover though, Secret Wars 2. It came out shortly after the first Secret Wars the following year, written by Jim Shooter, and plopped our favorite Marvel characters back into conflict with the Beyonder, who is having a whole existential crisis about the meaning of life. The Beyonder ends up on Earth, and is incredibly childlike, learning about human life for the first time. There's even a part of the story where Peter Parker teaches him how to use a bathroom. This childlike Beyonder ends up deciding he wants Earth for himself, which is the product of a massive ego trip, and he ends up getting killed by Molecule Man after he tries to destroy the entire multiverse, and also fails to find enlightenment. Really, it's the Beyonder story rather than a story about Marvel's beloved heroes, and a lot of whining ensued, so yeah, no thanks. And last but not least, in at number 1, Ultimatum. Ultimatum is often considered to be the crossover event that destroyed the Ultimate Universe, both metaphorically and kind of literally. Taking place on Earth 1610, the Ultimate Marvel Universe provided fans with reimagined and modernized versions of the Marvel character roster, which included new origin stories and even some quite unsettling characterizations. It was pretty neat. But in 2004, a lot of the creatives spearheading the Ultimate Universe line of comics departed from it, leaving Marvel editors believing that the only way to keep interest in it and ensure its survival was to do a massive crossover event. In the stories leading up to Ultimatum, there was a whole lot of gratuitous violence and deaths, along with a whole lot of shock value. And the series pretty much ditched everything tonally that made the Ultimate comics great to begin with. So that miniseries was panned by critics everywhere, and Ultimatum itself was not only a commercial failure, but is also considered by many to be one of the worst comic books of all time. The story killed off 34 characters, and because of its failure, Ultimate X-Men and Ultimate Fantastic Four were also cancelled. So what's some of the weird crap that goes on in it? Well, the Blob eats the Wasp, cannibal style. Hank Pym returns the favor by growing in size and then biting the Blob's head off and eating it as well. Doctor Strange's head explodes thanks to him being strangled by his own cape. There's a lot of other crap too that happened before it in the miniseries, but man, I don't think we have time to dive into all of that. It's just nasty.
Number 10. Batman/Punisher. There was a time when DC and Marvel crossed over. Not all the time, but it also wasn't unheard of. You could expect to see it every now and again. The relationship was not always so fraught. These crossover stories, which began with Superman meeting Spider-Man way back in the 70s, took place in a universe where these two worlds had just always been together, so no explanation required. They just had always coexisted. In that vein, we have a comic called Punisher and Batman Deadly Knights. Yes, with the knights spelled like an Arthurian round table because Batman is the Dark Knight. This came to us from 1994. Spoilers, Batman and the Punisher do not get along. At all. I mean, some of you could probably have imagined this. Batman's no-kill policy definitely goes against the Punisher's get it done no matter what, take him down for good mentality. This all comes to a head when they have a confrontation with the Joker, and Batman actually steps in front of him to protect him to stop the Punisher from killing him. The Punisher just leaves in disgust, saying that the two deserve each other and that all the deaths in Gotham that come from this are all on Batman's head. And Batman says that the Punisher is no better than the criminals he takes down. So yeah, it went about as well as could be expected. Number 9. Batman/Tarzan. Now, DC has a history of putting these two together, kinda sorta. They had a TV show hour, the Batman/Tarzan Adventure Hour, but that was like you got one episode of Batman, one episode of Tarzan. It wasn't, they were both together. 1999 changed all that with this outing. This is a full-blown team-up, and if you're asking why, who greenlit this, who wanted this, those are all good questions. This story is Batman/Tarzan Claws of the Catwoman, and it's a completely Elseworld story. The Batman here is from the 1930s, so he is period appropriate for Tarzan. The Catwoman in question is a priestess who is protected by an African cat cult, which sounds pretty exciting. Apparently this went well enough that a couple years later they had a spin-off where Superman would team up with Tarzan. And their spin-off was Superman/Tarzan, Sons of the Jungle. The 90s loved a good crossover. Sure, this latter story was from the early 2000s or the early aughts as people keep insisting upon calling it, but still counts because it was spawned in the 90s. Number 8. Batman and the Looney Tunes, or rather Batman and Elmer Fudd. This happened in Batman/Elmer Fudd from 2017, a special issue written by Tom King. And it's not exactly your traditional crossover, at least not the first story. The first story presents a world where the Looney Tunes characters are people. They live in Gotham, but they still have all of their traits. They're just either physical or personality based, so you know who they are. The whole tone of this is a film noir. There's gangsters, bar owners, etc. In this story, Elmer is with Silver St. Cloud, but he comes home to find her dead with Bruce Wayne's name on her lips. So of course that sets him on a collision course with Batman. Batman also used to be with Silver St. Cloud. It was a thing. She knew who he was. Never forget Silver St. Cloud. This story was heralded as groundbreaking, and while it is entertaining and certainly different, if you're a big film noir buff, you'll realize that it's just Laura. And if you've read it and seen Laura, you'll know what I mean. Still, it was a fun, dark take on a crossover. It was tongue-in-cheek. And the second story is just Batman being the Looney Tunes. Number 7. Batman/Grendel. 1993 brought us this comic which almost never saw the light of day because one of the companies actually went bankrupt before it was published, and that company was Comico. Grendel is not the monster of Arthurian folklore. No, instead he is an anti-hero. It is the name of a vigilante named Hunter Rose, who is an author by day, which is a great name, and I really hope he writes like erotic thrillers or something trashy like that. Hunter Rose. He was a dark anti-hero who worked as an assassin until he took over the New York crime organization. That's right, the Mafia. So as you can imagine, they too aren't gonna get along. This was another one of those crossovers where the two characters were automatically inside the same universe, just always had been. In this story, Grendel comes to Gotham to challenge Batman, saying he's gonna commit a crime and the Dark Knight has to stop him. Now, while he manages to pull off the crime, that doesn't mean that everything goes well. In fact, he barely makes it out of Gotham with just a broken arm. This crossover would do so well, it would actually get a follow-up in 1996, and then the two would be collected together in trade in 2008. The more you know. Number 6. Batman and the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. Heroes in a half shell. Turtle power. Thanks 2015. Okay, so the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles were not always the cute animated pizza eating teens that everybody is familiar with. Thank the 80s show for that. In their original comic book outing, they were actually pretty gritty, but they still ate pizza. And it's for that reason I can totally see them teaming up with Batman. This is not a story where the Turtles have always lived under Gotham or anything like that. Instead, in this story we have your typical sent to another dimension because of a mysterious technological device, which means you get to see the Turtles fighting some of Batman's rogues, like Killer Croc, and you get to see Batman fighting Shredder, and you get to see all of them hanging out in the Batcave. Because if anyone is going to accept the existence of radioactive Teenage Turtles, it's Batman. This one makes way more sense than it should, and it's scarily fun. I can feel you typing and judging, but come on, Damien hanging out with turtles. You know you want it. Number 5, Batman / Scooby-Doo. This is a classic, one of Batman's earliest crossovers and the most consistent. This one still happens, but you may be asking, just why did it happen? Well, the answer is actually very simple. Popularity, equal popularity. Batman the 1960s series was a huge phenomenon, and contrary to what many people think, people knew it was a satire. But it made a huge impact on the television landscape around it. Also popular at that time, Scooby-Doo. So why not combine these two things together? Batman had a big influence on shows from its time, like I mentioned. Like for example, The Man from U.N.C.L.E. changed its entire 3rd season because of this show. At this point, it's pretty much a tradition for these two groups to cross over, because he usually does it with Robin, if we have a Robin. So this is for your campier outings. It's a bit harder to imagine a gritty Batman hanging out with these teens, you know, roaming around solving mysteries with a band of teens, but if you think about it, he kind of does that anyway, except they're all teens that he adopted. Maybe he can adopt the Scooby Gang too, and he gets a cool van. Number 4, Batman vs. the Predator. Well, hello 1992, thanks for this. This was years after the first Predator movie, which came out in 1987, but the sequel, called Predators 2, came out in 1990. This story involved Batman investigating the death of a boxer, and this investigation led him right up close with the Predator. And this encounter nearly killed him. It took him a long time to recover, and he had to pull out all the stops when he got back into the fight. This includes your typical Batman exoskeleton suit. This story would get 2 sequels. It's a simple concept, so it really works. Just the idea that the Predator would be interested in Batman as prey, well, people can believe it, because he can put up a good fight. Number 3, The Darkness / Batman. Now this is a one-shot from 1999. This is not a team-up story, it's more along the veins of Batman and Grendel. These two are not gonna get along. Villains and heroes and anti-heroes and stuff. This is a let them fight style story. The Darkness, aka Jackie Estacado, was expanding his business into Gotham. And what business is that? The Mafia. He's a former hitman. Now, if you know Batman, he's not gonna let something like that stand. He has to stop all crime, and that includes organized crime. This story is a bit more Darkness heavy than Batman heavy, but it can serve to get you interested in the Darkness if you don't know anything about him. And the Darkness was a big deal in the 90s. So was Witchblade, and those two are actually connected. They have a baby. Well, he does with one of the Witchblades. There's more than one Witchblade. Still, Batman feels a bit tacked on here. Like maybe this is one of those stories that could use a sequel or an update. It needs to be a bit more epic. Or maybe you feel it's epic enough. Let me know down below. Number 2, Batman / Spawn. This comes to us from 1994. The 90s and crossovers, I'm telling you. They just keep coming. Spawn was the brainchild of Todd McFarlane, who used the opportunity to create his own character to break away from the mainstream comic book industry, with which he was growing disillusioned. The Batman we're dealing with here is the Frank Miller Batman, and he co-writes the story, 2 of them together. It's 90s Miller, so he hasn't gone crazy off the rails yet, although some feel he never did. Subjective. This story is still bonkers though. Batman is in New York looking for robots with a high-tech arsenal who are using decapitated heads for their brains. Yes, Batman and Spawn are super suspicious of each other at the start. In fact, they fight for a while before they decide, or realize rather, that they need to team up because they're looking for the same people. This story is actually meant to be a companion piece to The Dark Knight Returns, but it doesn't really make sense with that continuity or Spawn's, so it's kind of just out there. Still, it's a cool team up whether it makes sense or not. Number 1, Batman / Aliens. Oh yes, Batman takes on xenomorphs, yes he does. Coming at you from 1997. DC characters crossing over with aliens is actually not a new thing. You have Superman, Green Lantern, 2 Green Lanterns, Batman, and they're all separate stories. They're not connected, it's just different heroes fighting xenomorphs. So our premise for this one is that Batman parachuted deep into the Guatemalan jungle because he's looking for one Wayne Enterprises employee, a geologist, because he's dedicated like that. It's nice to know that he'll find you if you go missing. Comforting. He encounters a special ops team and then they are attacked by an alien. From there it turns into your typical alien plot. We've got face huggers, we've got people getting picked off one by one, only one person standing, guess who that is. You also get to see some interesting alien and human animal hybrids, so you get to see like alien and a crocodile hybrid. Blech. Batman ultimately keeps his encounter with aliens a secret because he's afraid of what people would do with the knowledge of Xenomorph's existence. And in a world with Lex Luthor and Star Labs, I get it. This story would have a sequel in 2003. This one really works because it's so self-contained and you can see Batman meeting aliens and then just never talking about it again. Well, different aliens because he knows several aliens actually.